At my baby shower, surrounded by 50 guests and baby blue decorations, my sister Victoria stood up during the gift opening ceremony and announced to everyone that the child I was carrying was not my husband's. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You are right, but what you do not know will change everything you think about this family." What happened next exposed secrets that had been buried for 20 years and transformed me from the family disappointment into the woman who finally broke the cycle of lies that had poisoned 3 generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and the story I'm about to tell you began long before that devastating afternoon in March, when my sister decided to weaponize my most vulnerable moment. To understand why her words hit like they did, and why my response changed everything, you need to understand the intricate web of family dysfunction that had been strangling me for 32 years. I grew up in Riverside, California, in a house where appearances mattered more than truth, where keeping secrets was considered loyalty, and where love came with conditions that shifted depending on how well you performed your assigned role in the family drama. My parents, Carmen and Roberto Rodriguez, had built their lives around the illusion of perfection. Roberto owned a successful auto repair business that had grown into a chain of 5 locations across the Inland Empire. Carmen worked as a real estate agent for high-end properties, specializing in helping successful Latino families find homes that reflected their achievements. Our house was a testament to their success. A sprawling Mediterranean-style home in one of Riverside's most exclusive neighborhoods, with manicured gardens, imported tile work, and enough space for the elaborate parties my parents hosted to maintain their social standing. Everything about our lives was designed to project prosperity, stability, and traditional family values. Victoria, my older sister by 4 years, had always been the golden child who seemed incapable of disappointing anyone. She graduated valedictorian from high school, earned a full scholarship to UCLA, and became a successful pediatric nurse who married a cardiologist named David Chen. They lived in a mansion in Newport Beach, drove luxury cars, and produced 2 perfectly behaved children who excelled at everything from violin to soccer. I, on the other hand, had spent my entire life feeling like I was failing to meet standards that were never clearly articulated but always present. I had been a good student but not exceptional, attractive but not stunning, responsible but not inspiring. Every achievement felt diminished by the unspoken comparison to Victoria's effortless success. Every choice I made seemed to confirm that I was the family member who required management rather than celebration. The pattern had established itself early and had never been broken. When Victoria made the honor roll, my B+ average was treated as evidence that I was not applying myself. When Victoria was elected student body president, my participation in drama club was seen as frivolous. When Victoria received her nursing degree, my decision to become a high school English teacher was met with polite disappointment disguised as support. By the time I reached my 30s, I had internalized the belief that I was fundamentally inadequate compared to my sister, despite objective evidence that my life was successful by any reasonable standard. I owned a beautiful home in a desirable neighborhood, had built a respected career teaching advanced placement literature, and had married a wonderful man who loved me unconditionally. None of that seemed to matter when measured against Victoria's achievements and my parents' obvious preference for their elder daughter. My husband, Michael Harrison, was everything my family should have celebrated in a son-in-law. He was kind, intelligent, financially stable, and genuinely devoted to me. Michael worked as a software engineer for an aerospace company, where his expertise in navigation systems had earned him recognition and advancement opportunities that provided us with comfortable financial security. More importantly, he possessed the kind of emotional intelligence and personal integrity that made him the perfect partner for someone who had grown up in a family where love was conditional and criticism was constant. Michael and I had met 5 years earlier at a community college where he was teaching an evening course in computer programming, and I was taking a class to improve my technology skills for classroom instruction. Our relationship had developed gradually, built on genuine compatibility and mutual respect rather than passion or convenience. He understood my family dynamics without being intimidated by them, and he had consistently encouraged me to establish boundaries that protected our relationship from the toxic patterns that had dominated my upbringing. When we decided to get married, Michael had been clear about his intentions to create a family environment that was fundamentally different from the one I had experienced. He wanted children who felt unconditionally loved, supported in their individual interests, and valued for who they were rather than how well they performed compared to others. His vision of family life was exactly what I had always wanted but had never believed was possible. Our wedding had been a beautiful but tense affair, where every detail became an opportunity for my family to demonstrate their superior taste and resources. Victoria served as my maid of honor, and had managed to subtly upstage me by announcing her second pregnancy during the reception. My parents had insisted on hosting an elaborate celebration that reflected their social status rather than our preferences, and they had treated Michael's family with polite condescension that made me ashamed of my own relatives. Despite these challenges, Michael and I had built a strong marriage based on honest communication and shared values. We had bought a charming craftsman-style house in a neighborhood filled with young families, where we had spent 3 years creating the kind of warm, authentic home environment that neither of us had experienced as children. Michael had converted the back bedroom into a home office where he could work remotely when needed, and I had claimed the sunroom as a reading space where I graded papers and prepared lesson plans. Our decision to start a family had been carefully considered and eagerly anticipated. We had discussed parenting approaches extensively, agreeing that we wanted to raise children who felt secure enough to take risks, confident enough to pursue their genuine interests, and emotionally intelligent enough to form healthy relationships. We had read books, attended classes, and consulted with friends who seemed to be succeeding at the kind of parenting we hoped to provide. When I became pregnant after 8 months of trying, we were overjoyed but cautious about sharing the news with my family. Previous experience had taught us that any announcement would become an opportunity for comparisons, unsolicited advice, and subtle criticisms disguised as helpful suggestions. We decided to wait until the second trimester to tell anyone, hoping that our excitement would be strong enough to withstand whatever reactions we encountered. The pregnancy had been progressing beautifully. I had experienced minimal morning sickness, maintained my energy levels well enough to continue teaching, and had received consistently positive reports from my obstetrician. Michael had been incredibly supportive, taking over household responsibilities that had become difficult for me, and accompanying me to every medical appointment. We had converted our spare bedroom into a nursery, painted in soft yellows and greens, since we had decided to wait until birth to learn the baby's gender. The decision to have a baby shower had not been mine. Carmen had insisted that it was important to celebrate this milestone properly, and she had volunteered to host the event at her house. Despite my reservations about turning my pregnancy into a social performance, I had agreed, because refusing would have created family conflict that would have overshadowed the celebration. Michael had supported my decision while privately expressing concerns about allowing my family to control such an important event. The planning process had been exactly as difficult as I had anticipated. Carmen had treated the baby shower as an opportunity to demonstrate her event planning skills and social connections, rather than a celebration of my impending motherhood. She had invited people I barely knew, including clients from her real estate business and friends from her country club, who had never shown interest in my life. The guest list had grown from the intimate gathering of close friends that I had envisioned, to an elaborate production designed to impress people whose opinions had no relevance to my actual life. Victoria had involved herself in every aspect of the planning, offering suggestions that consistently elevated the formality and expense of the event. She had pushed for elaborate floral arrangements, expensive catering, and party favors that transformed a simple celebration into something that resembled a corporate function more than a family gathering. Her involvement had felt intrusive rather than supportive, but challenging her would have required energy that I preferred to reserve for more important battles. The morning of the baby shower, I had woken up with a sense of dread that I could not entirely explain. Michael had tried to reassure me that the event would be fine, and that the most important thing was celebrating our upcoming arrival with people who cared about us. His optimism had been infectious enough to improve my mood, and I had managed to convince myself that I was being unnecessarily anxious about what should be a joyful occasion. The shower was held on a Saturday afternoon in March, when the weather was perfect for the outdoor setup that Carmen had arranged in her backyard. Tables covered with white linens were arranged around the pool, decorated with centerpieces of white and blue hydrangeas that coordinated with the baby-themed decorations she had selected. A gift table had been positioned prominently near the patio doors, where the wrapped packages created an impressive display of anticipated generosity. I had arrived early to help with final preparations, wearing a flowing blue dress that accommodated my 7-month pregnancy while still looking festive enough for photographs. Michael had planned to stay for the first hour before leaving to give me time with the female guests, as was traditional for baby showers. His presence during the initial phase provided the emotional support I needed to navigate conversations with relatives and family friends, who had strong opinions about everything from baby names to parenting philosophies. The first 2 hours of the event proceeded exactly as I had expected. Guests arrived with gifts and good wishes, engaging in the kind of polite conversation that characterizes family gatherings, where genuine intimacy is rare, but social obligations are strong. I opened presents while seated in a decorated chair that had been positioned to ensure good visibility for photographs, expressing gratitude for items that ranged from practical necessities to elaborate luxuries that reflected the giver's relationship with my parents rather than their knowledge of my preferences. Victoria had been unusually quiet during the gift opening ceremony, which I had attributed to her being tired from managing her own children while attending a social event. She had been standing near the gift table, helping to organize the opened presents and keeping track of who had given what for thank you note purposes. Her subdued behavior had actually been a relief, since her tendency to dominate conversations often made family gatherings feel like performances where everyone else served as her supporting cast. The moment that changed everything came when I was opening a gift from my college roommate Sarah, who had sent a beautiful wooden rocking chair, along with a heartfelt note about her excitement for my journey into motherhood. I was reading the note aloud, sharing Sarah's warm wishes with the assembled guests, when Victoria suddenly stepped forward and asked for everyone's attention. "Before Elena gets too carried away with all these gifts," Victoria announced in a voice that was loud enough to ensure that every conversation stopped, "I think everyone should know that the baby she is carrying is not her husband's child." The silence that followed her declaration was absolute and suffocating. 50 guests turned to stare at me, their expressions ranging from shock to confusion to barely concealed excitement at witnessing such dramatic family conflict. I could feel my face burning with humiliation and rage, but something inside me remained perfectly calm, as if I had been preparing for this moment my entire life without realizing it. I looked directly at Victoria, who was standing with her arms crossed and a satisfied expression that revealed how much she was enjoying the chaos she had created. In that moment, I understood that her attack was not spontaneous or emotional, but calculated and deliberate. She had chosen the most public and humiliating possible moment to destroy me, and she was expecting me to crumble under the weight of shame and social embarrassment. Instead, I stood up slowly, placed my hands on my pregnant belly, and spoke in a voice that was steady and clear enough for everyone to hear. "You are absolutely right, Victoria," I said, meeting her eyes without flinching. "This baby is not Michael's biological child. But what you do not know is that Michael and I have been trying to conceive for 3 years, and when we discovered that his childhood cancer treatment had left him sterile, we decided to use a sperm donor to fulfill our dream of becoming parents. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The gasps and murmurs that rippled through the crowd indicated that my revelation had not been what anyone expected, but I was not finished. "What you also do not know," I continued, "is that the sperm donor we selected is Michael's own brother Daniel, who volunteered to help us have a child that would share Michael's genetic heritage. And what you definitely do not know is that I have been protecting a family secret for 20 years. But, after what you just did to me in front of all these people, I think it is time for everyone to learn the truth about why you are so desperate to destroy my happiness." The silence that followed was even more profound than before, but now it carried a different energy. Victoria's confident expression had been replaced by something that looked like panic, and I could see that she finally understood that her attack had backfired in ways she had never anticipated. What happened next would expose decades of lies, transform every relationship in my family, and teach me that sometimes the courage to tell the truth is the only thing that can set you free from the people who have been using your silence to control you. But that is a story that deserves its own telling, and the lessons I learned about family, loyalty, and the difference between keeping someone's secrets and enabling their destruction of others, would change not just my life, but the lives of everyone who had been trapped in the same web of lies that had nearly destroyed me. The baby shower ended in chaos, but my real life was just beginning. The seconds after I revealed the truth about our fertility journey and hinted at deeper family secrets stretched like hours. Victoria's face had gone completely white, and I could see her hands trembling as she realized that her calculated attack had not only failed but had opened a door that she had spent decades keeping locked. The 50 guests who had come to celebrate my pregnancy were now witnessing what would become the most transformative confrontation of my adult life. My mother Carmen rose from her chair near the gift table, her expressions cycling rapidly between confusion, anger, and something that looked remarkably like fear. She had built her entire social identity around the image of a successful family, where everyone played their assigned roles perfectly, and the conversation unfolding in her perfectly manicured backyard threatened to destroy that carefully constructed facade. "Elena, I think you need to calm down," Carmen said, her voice carrying the tone of authority she had used throughout my childhood to end conversations that threatened her comfort. "This is not the time or place for family drama. We have guests." The irony of her statement was so profound that several guests actually gasped audibly. Victoria had just publicly humiliated me in front of 50 people by announcing intimate details about my pregnancy, but somehow my honest response was considered inappropriate family drama. The double standard was so blatant that even my most conflict-averse relatives could not ignore it. "No, Mom," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Victoria made this the time and place when she decided to attack me publicly. If she can share her version of my private business with everyone here, then I can share the complete truth. Michael had returned from the house where he had been helping my father organize additional seating, and he moved to stand beside me with the kind of quiet support that had characterized our entire relationship. His presence reminded me that I was not alone in facing this confrontation, and that everything I was about to reveal had been discussed and agreed upon between us. Victoria found her voice, though it sounded strained and desperate. "Elena, you do not know what you are doing. Some things are better left private. Like the fact that David is not actually your husband?" I asked, watching her face crumble as I spoke the words that had been burning inside me for 2 decades. "Like the fact that you have been married to your brother-in-law this entire time because your real husband died in Afghanistan before your first wedding anniversary?" The collective intake of breath from our assembled guests created a sound like wind rushing through trees. Several people actually stood up from their chairs, as if the revelation was too shocking to process while seated. Victoria's perfect facade finally cracked completely, and tears began streaming down her face as 20 years of carefully maintained lies collapsed in the space of a single sentence. The story I was finally telling had begun when Victoria was 24 years old and newly married to Lieutenant James Chen, David's younger brother. James had been deployed to Afghanistan 6 months after their wedding, and Victoria had been planning to join him at his next duty station when his unit was attacked during a reconnaissance mission. The notification officers had arrived at Victoria's apartment on a Tuesday morning in October to inform her that her husband of 11 months had been killed by an improvised explosive device. Victoria's grief had been profound and complicated by the fact that she had discovered she was pregnant just days before receiving news of James's death. She had been facing the prospect of raising their child alone while dealing with the trauma of losing her husband in a war that she had never supported. The combination of grief, hormones, and financial stress had created a psychological crisis that had required professional intervention and family support. David Chen had been completing his medical residency in cardiology when his brother was killed, and he had taken leave to help Victoria navigate the practical and emotional challenges of sudden widowhood. David had always been the more stable and academically successful of the two brothers, and his presence during Victoria's darkest period had provided the support system she needed to function. What had started as brotherly concern and practical assistance had gradually evolved into something more complicated. Victoria and David had found comfort in their shared grief for James, and their relationship had deepened into emotional intimacy that eventually became romantic. When Victoria miscarried James's baby during her 4th month of pregnancy, David had been the person who held her through the physical and emotional pain of losing the last connection to her deceased husband. Their decision to marry had been controversial within the Chen family, where some relatives felt that David was betraying his brother's memory by pursuing a relationship with James's widow. Victoria's pregnancy loss had eliminated the most obvious reason for their union, but their emotional bond had grown strong enough to overcome family objections and social awkwardness. The complication had arisen from Victoria's inability to process her grief in a healthy way. Instead of acknowledging that she had fallen in love with David after losing James, she had constructed an elaborate psychological defense mechanism that involved pretending that David was actually James returned to her in a different form. Her trauma had created a dissociative response that allowed her to maintain her relationship with David while avoiding the reality that her first marriage had ended in tragedy. David had initially participated in this fiction because he believed it was helping Victoria heal from her trauma. He had allowed her to introduce him as James in social situations, had not corrected people who assumed he was her original husband, and had eventually adopted the identity so completely that most people in their social circle had no idea that Victoria had been married before. The deception had become increasingly elaborate over the years. Victoria had removed all photographs of James from her home, had destroyed documents that referenced her first marriage, and had created a completely fictional narrative about her relationship history that positioned David as her college sweetheart and only husband. She had never sought professional help for her trauma, instead relying on denial and fantasy to avoid confronting the reality of her loss. I had learned the truth during my sophomore year of college when I had discovered a box of James's military records and personal effects that Victoria had hidden in our parents' attic. The documents had revealed not only the existence of Victoria's first marriage, but also the circumstances of James's death and the timeline that made David's identity switch clear. When I had confronted Victoria about my discovery, she had broken down completely and begged me to keep her secret. Her explanation had been heartbreaking and convincing. She had described her inability to move forward if people knew she was James's widow, her fear that David would leave her if forced to confront the reality of their relationship's origins, and her terror that acknowledging James's death would somehow make it more real and permanent. She had convinced me that revealing the truth would destroy her marriage and her mental health. For 20 years I had kept Victoria's secret at considerable personal cost. Every family gathering where people praised her perfect marriage had been an exercise in swallowing my discomfort with the deception. Every conversation where Victoria dispensed relationship advice based on her supposedly long and stable marriage had made me complicit in her fraud. Every moment when she used her fictional marriage history to position herself as the family expert on commitment and stability had required me to remain silent while she built her reputation on lies. The burden of keeping Victoria's secret had affected my own relationships and self-image in ways that I had not fully understood until this moment. I had internalized the message that truth was less important than maintaining family harmony, that protecting others from consequences was more valuable than honesty, and that my own discomfort with deception was less significant than Victoria's need to avoid accountability. Victoria's attack on me at the baby shower had finally provided the catalyst I needed to break free from the conspiracy of silence that had been suffocating our family for decades. Her willingness to humiliate me publicly in order to deflect attention from her own insecurities had revealed the true nature of our relationship dynamic. She had been using my knowledge of her secret as leverage to maintain her position as the favored daughter, knowing that I would never risk exposing her deception. "How could you do this to me?" Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible above the stunned murmurs of our guests. "You promised you would never tell anyone." "I promised I would keep your secret when I was 19 years old and believed that protecting you was more important than protecting myself," I replied. "But I never promised to let you destroy my life to protect your lies." The transformation in our family dynamics was immediate and irreversible. Carmen and Roberto were staring at Victoria with expressions of shock and betrayal that made it clear they had never suspected the truth about her marriage. Several guests were quietly gathering their belongings and leaving, unwilling to remain present for what had become an intensely private family crisis being played out in public. David arrived at the party just as I was finishing my revelation, having driven over from his hospital shift to join the celebration. His appearance created another wave of shocked recognition among the guests, who were seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The physical resemblance between David and James had been strong enough to support Victoria's deception, but the psychological strain of maintaining false identity was evident in his posture and expression. Victoria told me you might cause problems today, David said quietly, approaching our small group near the gift table. She said you had been acting unstable about the pregnancy and might say things to get attention. His words revealed the extent to which Victoria had been manipulating the narrative around our relationship, positioning me as mentally unstable in order to discredit any potential revelation of her secret. The realization that she had been systematically undermining my credibility with family members for years felt like another layer of betrayal being peeled away. David, I said, looking directly at him, I kept your secret for 20 years because I believed Victoria when she said that revealing the truth would destroy your marriage. But after what she just did to me, I think you deserve to know that she has been telling people I am mentally unstable to prevent anyone from believing me if I ever told the truth. The pain that crossed David's face was profound and immediate. He had been living with the psychological burden of maintaining false identity for 2 decades, and learning that Victoria had been using their deception to manipulate and control other family members clearly added another dimension to his suffering. I never wanted any of this, David said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I loved James, and I love Victoria, but I have been living as a ghost of my dead brother for so long that I do not remember who I actually am anymore. The conversation that followed was raw, painful, and ultimately liberating for everyone involved. Victoria's carefully constructed world of denial and manipulation collapsed completely, as she was forced to confront not only the reality of her first marriage and widowhood, but also the damage that her deception had caused to every relationship in our family. Carmen and Roberto struggled to process the revelation that their supposedly perfect daughter had been living a lie for 20 years, and had manipulated family dynamics to maintain her deception. The discovery that Victoria had been undermining me to protect her secret forced them to reconsider every assumption they had made about our relative characters and achievements. The remaining guests witnessed a family finally confronting decades of dysfunction, denial, and manipulation. While the immediate aftermath was chaotic and emotionally overwhelming, the long-term effect was the beginning of honest relationships based on truth rather than performance. Michael's support throughout this confrontation was unwavering and transformative. He had known about Victoria's secret because I had told him during our engagement, but he had respected my decision to maintain the family's conspiracy of silence. Watching him stand beside me as I finally broke free from the toxic dynamic that had controlled my life for decades made me realize how much strength I had gained through our partnership. The baby shower ended with most guests departing in stunned silence, leaving our immediate family to begin the difficult process of rebuilding relationships based on honesty rather than deception. Victoria's attack on me had backfired completely, exposing her own vulnerabilities while revealing my capacity for courage and truth-telling that had been suppressed for far too long. As I sat in my parents' backyard, surrounded by abandoned party decorations and unwrapped gifts, I felt something I had never experienced in their presence before: complete authenticity. For the first time in my adult life, I was not hiding any part of myself or protecting anyone else's lies. The fear that had controlled me for decades had been replaced by clarity about who I was and what I would no longer tolerate. The real work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning, but the foundation had been laid for relationships based on truth rather than performance. The woman who had been diminished and controlled by family secrets was gone, replaced by someone who understood that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision that truth was more important than comfort. The baby I was carrying would be born into a family that had finally learned the difference between loyalty and complicity, between keeping secrets and enabling destruction. That child would grow up knowing that love does not require you to sacrifice your integrity to protect other people's lies. This was only the beginning of my transformation from victim to advocate, from secret keeper to truth teller, from someone who absorbed family dysfunction to someone who refused to pass it on to the next generation. The week following the baby shower confrontation passed in a blur of difficult conversations, sleepless nights, and the gradual realization that my decision to reveal Victoria's secret had initiated changes that extended far beyond our immediate family. The truth I had spoken in my parents' backyard had created ripple effects throughout our extended social network, forcing everyone who had known Victoria to reconsider assumptions they had held for decades. Michael and I spent those first days fielding phone calls from relatives, family friends, and acquaintances who had heard various versions of what had transpired at the shower. Some callers expressed support for my decision to defend myself against Victoria's attack. Others seemed more interested in gathering additional details about the scandal than in offering genuine concern for our well-being. The most difficult conversations came from people who suggested that I should have continued protecting Victoria's secret regardless of how she had treated me. The response from Michael's family provided a stark contrast to the complicated reactions from my own relatives. His parents had known about our fertility challenges and our decision to use his brother Daniel as a sperm donor, and they had supported our choice without reservation. When they learned about Victoria's public attack and my response, their primary concern was ensuring that we felt loved and supported during what they recognized as a traumatic experience. Daniel Harrison, Michael's younger brother and our baby's biological father, called us the evening after the shower to express his outrage at Victoria's behavior and his pride in how I had handled the situation. Daniel worked as a paramedic in San Diego and possessed the kind of straightforward honesty that made complex emotional situations feel manageable through direct communication. "I want you to know that what Victoria did was completely unacceptable," Daniel told me during our phone conversation. "The arrangement we made was based on love and family support, and anyone who tries to shame you for that is revealing their own ignorance and cruelty." His validation meant more to me than he probably realized. The sperm donor arrangement had been emotionally complex for all three of us, requiring careful navigation of boundaries and expectations to ensure that our relationships remained healthy and clear. Daniel had approached the situation with maturity and genuine care for our well-being, never making the process feel transactional or uncomfortable. The decision to use Daniel as our sperm donor had emerged naturally from conversations about Michael's infertility and our desire to have children who shared genetic connections to our family. When medical testing revealed that Michael's childhood leukemia treatment had left him sterile, we had initially considered anonymous sperm donation before Daniel offered to help us create a child who would carry Michael's family genetics. The process had required extensive counseling, legal documentation, and medical procedures that had tested our emotional resilience, while ultimately strengthening our commitment to becoming parents. Daniel had participated in every aspect of the process with complete transparency and appropriate boundaries, making it clear that his role was to help us create our family, rather than to claim any parental rights or ongoing involvement beyond his existing relationship as uncle. Victoria's decision to weaponize this information revealed her complete lack of understanding about the love and sacrifice that had made our pregnancy possible. Her attack had been designed to shame us for our fertility challenges and our creative solution to building our family, demonstrating a level of cruelty that exceeded anything I had previously experienced from her. The most profound change in the week following the shower was my relationship with my parents. Carmen and Roberto had been forced to confront not only Victoria's decades of deception, but also their own role in creating family dynamics that had enabled and rewarded manipulation while punishing authenticity. The discovery that their supposedly perfect daughter had been living a complete lie had shattered their confidence in their ability to understand their own children. Carmen's initial response had been to suggest that everyone involved should simply agree to forget what had happened and return to normal family interactions. Her proposal revealed the depth of her investment in maintaining appearances rather than addressing underlying problems, and her inability to understand that truth-telling was healing rather than destructive. "Elena, I think we all said things we regret in the heat of the moment," Carmen had told me during a phone call 3 days after the shower. "Victoria is devastated, and I think it would be best for everyone if we could put this behind us and move forward." Her suggestion that I should apologize for revealing Victoria's secret, while Victoria faced no consequences for her public attack, demonstrated how thoroughly she had internalized the family's dysfunctional patterns. The idea that protecting Victoria's comfort was more important than addressing her cruel behavior revealed why these dynamics had persisted for decades without challenge. "Mom, I am not going to apologize for telling the truth after Victoria tried to humiliate me in front of 50 people, I had replied. "If you want our family to heal from this, it has to start with acknowledging that what Victoria did was wrong, and that keeping her secret has been harmful to everyone involved." Roberto's response had been more complex and ultimately more encouraging. As a businessman who had built his success through honest dealing and transparent communication, He had been deeply disturbed by the revelation that his daughter had been living a completely false identity for 20 years. His questions about Victoria's deception had focused on understanding how it had happened and what it revealed about the family environment he had helped create. I keep thinking about all the times Victoria gave advice about marriage and relationships, Roberto had confided during a private conversation. She has been presenting herself as an expert based on completely false information, and I wonder how many people she has misled with her guidance. His concern about the broader impact of Victoria's deception demonstrated the kind of moral clarity that had been missing from our family's approach to this situation. Roberto understood that lies create harm that extends beyond the immediate participants, and that accountability was necessary for genuine healing to occur. The most difficult aspect of this period was watching Victoria struggle with the collapse of her carefully constructed false identity. David had moved out of their Newport Beach home temporarily to stay with his parents while they both sought individual therapy to address the psychological impact of maintaining their deception for 2 decades. Victoria's children had been told that their father needed some time away to deal with work stress, but the older child had clearly sensed that more significant problems were disrupting their family stability. Victoria's first direct communication with me came in the form of a handwritten letter delivered to our house 5 days after the shower. The letter was 8 pages long and revealed the depth of her psychological struggle with both her original trauma and the consequences of her decades-long deception. She wrote about the unbearable grief she had experienced after James's death and her inability to process the reality that her first marriage had ended so tragically. She described the gradual development of her relationship with David and her growing terror that acknowledging her widowhood would somehow diminish or dishonor her love for both men. She explained her construction of false identity as a survival mechanism that had allowed her to function when the truth felt too overwhelming to bear. The most revealing section of Victoria's letter addressed her attack on me at the baby shower. She acknowledged that her behavior had been cruel and unjustifiable, but she attempted to explain it as the desperate action of someone who felt cornered by her own deception. She had convinced herself that creating scandal around my pregnancy would distract family attention from questions about her own marriage that she feared were beginning to surface. "I know what I did was unforgivable," Victoria had written. "I was so afraid that people were starting to notice inconsistencies in my story about David and me that I thought if I created drama around your situation, everyone would focus on that instead. I never intended for you to reveal everything, and I realize now that I put you in an impossible position by attacking you publicly while expecting you to protect my privacy." Her letter continued with detailed apologies and expressions of regret, but it also contained requests for forgiveness and suggestions about how we might rebuild our relationship. The tone throughout was manipulative in subtle ways that revealed Victoria's continued inability to take full responsibility for her choices without seeking to minimize their impact or expedite her return to family favor. Reading Victoria's letter helped me understand that her attack on me had not been a spontaneous emotional outburst, but a calculated strategy to protect her deception through misdirection. The realization that she had been willing to sacrifice my reputation and emotional well-being to maintain her false identity was profoundly clarifying about the nature of our relationship and her character. My response to Victoria's letter was brief and direct. I acknowledged her apology while making it clear that rebuilding our relationship would require genuine accountability and professional help rather than simply expressions of regret. I explained that her attack had revealed fundamental problems in how she viewed our family relationships, and that superficial reconciliation would not address the underlying issues that had created this crisis. The most transformative conversation during this period occurred with my maternal grandmother, Esperanza Rodriguez, who had been present at the baby shower but had remained silent during the confrontation. Esperanza had immigrated to the United States from Mexico as a young woman and had built a life based on hard work, family loyalty, and traditional values that emphasized protecting family reputation above individual concerns. 3 days after the shower, Esperanza asked me to visit her alone so we could discuss what had happened without other family members present. I had expected her to express disappointment in my decision to reveal Victoria's secret, based on her lifelong emphasis on maintaining family harmony and avoiding public scandal. Instead, Esperanza surprised me with her perspective on the situation. She had suspected for years that something was wrong with Victoria's marriage story, based on small inconsistencies and behavioral patterns that had troubled her, but that she had never felt comfortable questioning directly. Learning the truth about Victoria's first marriage and David's identity had provided answers to questions that had been bothering her for decades. "Mija, I have been keeping secrets my whole life," Esperanza told me as we sat in her small kitchen drinking coffee. "I kept secrets about your grandfather's drinking, about your uncle's gambling, about your aunt's affairs. I thought I was protecting the family by keeping quiet, but all I did was make it easier for people to hurt each other without consequences." Her words carried the weight of 7 decades of experience and the wisdom that comes from recognizing patterns that repeat across generations. Esperanza had watched our family struggle with the same dysfunctional dynamics that had characterized her own upbringing, and she had begun to understand that silence enables harm rather than preventing it. "What Victoria did to you was wrong, and what you did by telling the truth was brave," she continued. "I should have been braver when I was younger. Maybe if I had spoken up about the problems I saw, we would not have passed them down to you and Victoria." Her support provided validation that I had not expected but desperately needed. Esperanza's approval of my decision to break the conspiracy of silence felt like permission to continue pursuing truth and authenticity in family relationships, even when it created temporary discomfort or conflict. The week concluded with Michael and me attending our first appointment with a family therapist who specialized in helping couples navigate complex fertility journeys and family of origin issues. Dr. Sarah Kim had been recommended by our obstetrician after I had described the stress of the baby shower confrontation and our concerns about protecting our child from similar family dysfunction. Dr. Kim helped us process the emotional impact of Victoria's attack while developing strategies for maintaining healthy boundaries with family members who had not yet learned to respect our choices or our privacy. She validated our decision to use Daniel as a sperm donor and affirmed that Victoria's attempt to shame us for our fertility journey revealed her issues rather than any problems with our approach to building our family. The therapy session also addressed our concerns about raising our child in a family environment that had historically rewarded deception and manipulation, while punishing authenticity and truth-telling. Dr. Kim helped us understand that breaking generational patterns required consistent modeling of healthy communication and boundaries rather than perfect family relationships. As I left Dr. Kim's office that Friday afternoon, I realized that Victoria's attack had inadvertently provided the catalyst for changes that were long overdue in our family system. Her attempt to destroy my reputation had instead exposed the dysfunction that had been poisoning our relationships for decades, creating opportunities for healing that would not have existed otherwise. The woman who had spent 32 years accommodating family dysfunction to maintain peace was being replaced by someone who understood that genuine peace required truth, accountability, and respect for boundaries. The child I was carrying would be born into a family that was learning to value authenticity over appearance, courage over compliance, and love over control. The transformation was just beginning, but the foundation had been established for relationships based on honesty rather than performance, support rather than manipulation, and genuine care rather than conditional approval. The most difficult work lay ahead, but for the first time in my life, I felt equipped to handle whatever challenges emerged from choosing truth over comfort. 2 weeks after the baby shower confrontation, I received a phone call that would reveal just how extensive the damage from Victoria's deception had become. The caller was Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a marriage counselor in Newport Beach who had been working with Victoria and David since their separation, following the revelation of their true identities. Dr. Walsh explained that Victoria had given her permission to contact me because their therapy sessions had uncovered additional layers of dysfunction that extended beyond the identity deception. The conversation that followed provided insights into the psychological mechanisms that had enabled Victoria to maintain her elaborate fiction for 20 years, while simultaneously revealing the profound impact her deception had on David's mental health and their children's emotional development. Dr. Walsh's clinical perspective helped me understand that Victoria's attack on me had been the inevitable result of a psychological structure that was collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. According to Dr. Walsh, Victoria's therapeutic process had revealed that her inability to acknowledge James's death had created a dissociative response that affected every aspect of her psychological functioning. She had not simply created a false narrative about her marriage history, she had constructed an alternate reality where grief, loss, and trauma did not exist. This psychological defense mechanism had required constant maintenance and increasingly elaborate deceptions to sustain. David's participation in Victoria's deception had initially been motivated by genuine love and concern for her well-being, but over time it had evolved into a form of psychological imprisonment that had prevented him from developing his own authentic identity. Dr. Walsh explained that David had essentially been living as a ghost of his deceased brother for 2 decades, suppressing his own personality, interests, and emotional needs to maintain Victoria's psychological stability. The impact on their children had been particularly devastating. Their older child, 15-year-old Marcus, had developed anxiety and depression that Dr. Walsh attributed to growing up in a household where reality was constantly being manipulated to support false narratives. Marcus had internalized the message that truth was less important than maintaining appearances, and he had begun exhibiting similar patterns of deception in his own relationships. Their younger child, 12-year-old Sophia, had responded to the unstable family dynamics by becoming hypervigilant about adult emotions and behavior. She had developed an exhausting pattern of constantly monitoring her parents' moods and adjusting her own behavior to prevent conflict or emotional upset. Dr. Walsh describes Sophia's responses as typical of children who grow up in environments where they cannot trust that adults will handle problems appropriately. The therapeutic revelations helped me understand that Victoria's attack on me at the baby shower had not been an isolated incident of cruelty, but rather the inevitable consequence of a psychological system that was designed to protect her from accountability at any cost. Her willingness to destroy my reputation to preserve her deception revealed the extent to which her defense mechanisms had corrupted her ability to maintain genuine relationships. Dr. Walsh's insights also clarified why my decision to reveal Victoria's secret had been so psychologically devastating for her. The truth-telling had not simply exposed her lies. It had forced her to confront the grief and trauma that she had been avoiding for 20 years. The collapse of her false narrative had triggered the delayed grief response that she had been preventing through her elaborate deceptions. The conversation with Dr. Walsh concluded with her request for my participation in family therapy sessions that would address the impact of Victoria's deception on our extended family relationships. She explained that healing from this level of psychological dysfunction would require honest communication between all family members who had been affected by the deception, including those who had been unknowingly complicit in maintaining it. My decision to participate in family therapy represented another step in my transformation from someone who avoided conflict to someone who actively engaged in difficult conversations for the purpose of creating healthier relationships. The prospect of confronting decades of family dysfunction in a therapeutic setting was intimidating, but I recognized that avoiding these conversations would perpetuate the same patterns that had enabled Victoria's deception. The first family therapy session took place in Dr. Walsh's office on a Thursday evening 3 weeks after the baby shower. The participants included Victoria, David, my parents Carmen and Roberto, Michael, and myself. The absence of Victoria's children from this initial session had been intentional, as Dr. Walsh wanted to address the adult dynamics before involving the younger family members who had been most vulnerable to the psychological impact of the deception. Victoria's appearance at the therapy session revealed the toll that the collapse of her false identity had taken on her physical and emotional health. She had lost significant weight, her typically perfect grooming had been replaced by a disheveled appearance that suggested she was struggling with basic self-care, and her demeanor reflected the kind of exhaustion that comes from psychological systems that are no longer sustainable. David's presentation was equally concerning. The confident, successful cardiologist who had appeared at family gatherings for 20 years had been replaced by someone who seemed uncertain about fundamental aspects of his own identity. His posture, speech patterns, and even his facial expressions seemed different, as if the collapse of his false identity had revealed a person who had been suppressed for decades. The therapy session began with Dr. Walsh establishing ground rules for communication that would prevent the kind of defensive reactions and personal attacks that typically characterized our family's approach to conflict. She emphasized that the purpose of these sessions was healing rather than blame assignment, and that everyone present needed to commit to honest self-examination rather than focusing on other people's failures. Victoria's first contribution to the session was a more complete acknowledgement of her behavior at the baby shower and its impact on our family relationships. She described her attack on me as the desperate action of someone whose psychological defenses were failing, but she also took responsibility for the calculated nature of her cruelty and the damage it had caused to our relationship and my reputation. Her account of the events leading up to the baby shower revealed that she had been experiencing increasing anxiety about maintaining her deception for several months prior to my pregnancy announcement. She had begun to notice that her children were asking more sophisticated questions about their family history, and she had been struggling to maintain consistency in her responses to their inquiries. The news of my pregnancy had triggered a psychological crisis for Victoria, because it represented the addition of another family member who would need to be included in her deceptive narrative. She had become obsessed with the idea that my child would somehow expose inconsistencies in her false identity, and she had convinced herself that attacking my pregnancy would prevent this exposure. Victoria's explanation revealed the paranoid thinking that had characterized her psychological state in the months leading up to the baby shower. She had been interpreting normal family interactions as threats to her deception, and she had been developing increasingly elaborate strategies to protect her false narrative from potential exposure. David's contribution to the therapy session provided a different perspective on the psychological impact of maintaining false identity for 2 decades. He described the gradual erosion of his authentic self that had occurred as he had subsumed his own personality to support Victoria's deception. He explained that he had initially believed he was helping her heal from trauma, but he had eventually realized that their deception was preventing healing rather than facilitating it. His account of their marriage revealed that genuine intimacy had been impossible because every interaction had been filtered through the fiction of his false identity. He had been unable to share his own thoughts, feelings, and experiences authentically, because doing so would have threatened the narrative that Victoria needed to maintain her psychological stability. David's description of his relationship with his children was particularly heartbreaking. He explained that he had been unable to form genuine connections with Marcus and Sophia because he had been required to interact with them as a version of his deceased brother rather than as himself. This psychological distance had prevented him from providing the kind of authentic parental presence that children need for healthy emotional development. My parents' participation in the therapy session revealed their own complicity in enabling Victoria's deception, and their resistance to acknowledging their role in creating family dynamics that had rewarded manipulation while punishing authenticity. Carmen's initial responses focused on minimizing the significance of Victoria's deception and suggesting that everyone should simply move forward without dwelling on past problems. Roberto's contributions were more thoughtful and demonstrated greater willingness to examine his own behavior and its impact on family relationships. He acknowledged that his tendency to avoid difficult conversations had created an environment where deception could flourish unchallenged, and he expressed genuine remorse for the ways his conflict avoidance had contributed to the problems we were addressing. The most difficult part of the therapy session involved examining my own role in enabling Victoria's deception through my 20-year silence. Dr. Walsh helped me understand that my decision to keep Victoria's secret had been understandable given my age and family dynamics at the time. But she also challenged me to examine how my continued silence had affected my own psychological development and family relationships. The realization that emerged from this examination was that my role as Victoria's secret keeper had shaped my identity in ways that had limited my own authenticity and emotional growth. I had internalized the message that my value to the family was based on my willingness to sacrifice my own comfort to protect others from consequences, and this dynamic had affected every relationship in my life. Michael's participation in the therapy session provided a perspective from someone who had observed our family dynamics from outside, while being directly affected by them through our marriage. His observations about the impact of family dysfunction on my self-esteem and relationship patterns were painful but accurate, and his support for my decision to break the conspiracy of silence was unwavering. The session concluded with Dr. Walsh's assessment that healing from this level of family dysfunction would require ongoing therapeutic work and a fundamental restructuring of communication patterns and relationship boundaries. She emphasized that the changes necessary for genuine healing would be uncomfortable for everyone involved, but that the alternative was the perpetuation of psychological patterns that had already caused significant damage to multiple generations. The most significant insight from the therapy session was the recognition that Victoria's deception had been a symptom of broader family dysfunction rather than an isolated problem that could be addressed through individual counseling. The patterns of conflict avoidance, truth suppression, and appearance management that had enabled her deception were embedded in our family's approach to relationships and would need to be addressed systematically. Dr. Walsh's recommendation for ongoing family therapy represented a commitment to healing that would extend far beyond the immediate crisis created by Victoria's attack on me. The therapeutic process would require everyone involved to examine their own contributions to dysfunctional patterns and to develop new approaches to communication and conflict resolution. My decision to continue participating in family therapy marked another phase in my transformation from someone who accommodated dysfunction to maintain peace to someone who actively worked to create healthier relationship patterns. The process would be challenging and uncomfortable, but it represented the only path to genuine healing and authentic family relationships. The woman who had been silenced by family secrets was becoming someone who understood that healing required truth-telling, accountability, and the courage to endure temporary discomfort for the purpose of creating lasting positive change. The child I was carrying would benefit from this transformation, growing up in a family that was learning to value authenticity over appearance and genuine care over manipulative control. The therapeutic journey ahead would test everyone's commitment to change, but the foundation had been established for relationships based on honesty, respect, and mutual support, rather than deception, manipulation, and conditional love. The most difficult work was yet to come, but for the first time in decades, our family had the tools and professional support necessary to break generational patterns of dysfunction and create healthier dynamics for future generations. 6 weeks after the baby shower confrontation, I found myself sitting in the principal's office at Roosevelt High School, where I had been teaching advanced placement literature for 7 years. The meeting had been requested by Dr. Margaret Chen, the school's principal, after she received a phone call from a parent questioning my fitness to teach their child based on, quote, family scandal they had heard about through social media. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. Victoria's attempt to destroy my reputation through public humiliation had indeed created consequences for my professional life, but not in the way she had intended. Instead of being ashamed of the truth about our fertility journey and family dynamics, I found myself in a position to educate others about the realities of modern family building and the importance of authenticity in personal relationships. Dr. Chen, who was not related to David despite sharing his surname, had been my supervisor since I began teaching at Roosevelt. She was a thoughtful administrator who prioritized educational excellence while maintaining sensitivity to the complex personal lives that both students and teachers brought into the school environment. Her approach to addressing the parents' complaint demonstrated the kind of principled leadership that had made Roosevelt one of the most respected high schools in the district. The conversation began with Dr. Chen explaining that the parent, Mrs. Patricia Kellerman, had called to express concern about having her daughter in my English class after learning about inappropriate family drama that she felt reflected poorly on my character and judgment. Mrs. Kellerman had apparently heard a third-hand account of the baby shower incident and had formed conclusions about my moral fitness based on incomplete and distorted information. Rather than feeling defensive or ashamed about the situation, I experienced something unexpected: clarity about my values and confidence in my choices. The woman who would have been devastated by professional scrutiny 6 weeks earlier had been replaced by someone who understood that living authentically sometimes meant facing criticism from people who preferred comfortable illusions to difficult truths. I provided Dr. Chen with a complete and honest account of the baby shower incident, including the background of Victoria's deception, my 20-year silence about her secret, and the circumstances that had led to my decision to reveal the truth about our family dynamics. I explained our fertility challenges, our decision to use Michael's brother as a sperm donor, and the therapeutic work we were doing to address generational patterns of dysfunction in our family. Dr. Chen's response demonstrated the kind of wisdom and compassion that exemplified her leadership approach. She acknowledged that family situations could be complex, and that my professional performance had always been exemplary regardless of my personal circumstances. She expressed support for my decision to prioritize truth and authenticity over maintaining false appearances, and she confirmed that the parents' concerns would not affect my employment or professional standing. The most significant aspect of our conversation involved Dr. Chen's observation that my experience might provide valuable perspective for working with students who face similar challenges, with family dysfunction, identity issues, and the pressure to maintain false appearances. She suggested that my journey toward authenticity and healthy boundaries could serve as an example for teenagers who were struggling with their own family dynamics and personal identity development. This conversation marked a pivotal moment in my understanding of how personal transformation could create opportunities for professional growth and expanded impact. The experience that Victoria had intended to be professionally damaging had instead revealed strengths and insights that enhanced my effectiveness as an educator and mentor to young people facing their own challenges, with family expectations and authentic self-expression. The weeks that followed brought additional opportunities to test my newfound commitment to authenticity and truth-telling. Several colleagues approached me privately to share their own experiences with family secrets, fertility challenges, and the pressure to maintain perfect appearances in professional settings. These conversations revealed that my willingness to be vulnerable about difficult personal experiences had created permission for others to acknowledge their own struggles and seek support. Maria Santos, a fellow English teacher who had been struggling with her own infertility journey, confided that my openness about using a sperm donor had helped her consider options she had previously dismissed due to social stigma. She had been suffering in silence while undergoing multiple failed fertility treatments, believing that admitting defeat in conceiving naturally would reflect poorly on her worth as a woman and potential mother. James Patterson, a history teacher whose family had been torn apart by his father's gambling addiction and subsequent financial fraud, shared that my decision to break family silence about dysfunction had inspired him to seek therapy for his own trauma-related anxiety and depression. He had been maintaining a facade of normalcy while struggling with trust issues and emotional regulation that were affecting his relationships and teaching effectiveness. These conversations illuminated the broader impact of choosing authenticity over appearance management. My decision to respond honestly to Victoria's attack had created ripple effects that extended far beyond our immediate family, providing encouragement and validation for others who were struggling with similar challenges but had felt isolated in their experiences. The most transformative conversation occurred with Dr. Sarah Kim, our family therapist, during a joint session with Michael as we prepared for the arrival of our baby. Dr. Kim helped us process the emotional impact of the past 2 months, while developing strategies for protecting our child from the dysfunctional patterns that had characterized my family of origin. Dr. Kim's insights about intergenerational trauma and family systems provided a framework for understanding how patterns of deception, manipulation, and emotional abuse could be transmitted across generations, unless they were consciously interrupted through therapeutic work and deliberate changes in communication and relationship patterns. She explained that children who grow up in families where secrets are kept, truth is suppressed, and authentic emotions are discouraged, often develop psychological defense mechanisms that protect them from immediate harm, but limit their capacity for healthy relationships in adulthood. The patterns I had experienced in my family of origin were not unique, but rather represented common responses to trauma and dysfunction that could be found in many family systems. The therapeutic work involved examining my own internalized beliefs about relationships, conflict, and self-worth that had been shaped by decades of exposure to manipulative and controlling family dynamics. Dr. Kim helped me recognize that my tendency to accommodate others' needs at the expense of my own authenticity had been a survival mechanism that was no longer necessary or beneficial. The process of unlearning these patterns required consistent practice in setting boundaries, expressing authentic emotions, and prioritizing my own well-being in relationships. Dr. Kim provided specific tools and strategies for recognizing when I was falling into old patterns of conflict avoidance and people-pleasing, and she helped me develop alternative responses that honored both my own needs and my commitment to healthy relationships. Michael's participation in this therapeutic work was invaluable. His perspective as someone who had grown up in a healthier family environment provided contrast and validation for the changes I was working to implement. His consistent support for my growth and his commitment to creating a different kind of family environment for our child gave me confidence that the patterns I was breaking would not be transmitted to the next generation. The most significant breakthrough in therapy came when I realized that Victoria's attack on me had been a gift disguised as a betrayal. Her attempt to destroy my reputation through public humiliation had forced me to confront family dynamics that I might otherwise have continued to accommodate indefinitely. The crisis she created had catalyzed changes that were essential for my psychological health and my ability to become the kind of parent I wanted to be. This realization transformed my relationship with the entire experience. Instead of feeling victimized by Victoria's cruelty, I began to feel grateful for the clarity it had provided about our family dynamics and my own capacity for courage and authenticity. The woman who had been silenced by family secrets for 3 decades had discovered her voice and her power to create positive change. The impact of this transformation extended beyond my personal relationships to my professional effectiveness and community involvement. My willingness to be vulnerable about difficult experiences had enhanced my ability to connect with students who were struggling with their own family challenges and identity issues. Several students began seeking me out for informal mentoring conversations about navigating family expectations while maintaining personal authenticity. One particularly meaningful conversation occurred with Isabella Martinez, a 17-year-old student whose family was pressuring her to abandon her college plans in favor of an arranged marriage to a family friend's son. Isabella had been struggling with depression and anxiety as she tried to balance respect for her cultural traditions with her own aspirations for education and independence. My story about breaking free from family expectations and creating authentic relationships had provided Isabella with a framework for understanding her own situation and considering alternatives that honored both her heritage and her individual goals. She began working with the school counselor to explore scholarship opportunities and develop strategies for communicating with her family about her educational aspirations. These interactions with students reinforced my understanding that personal transformation could create opportunities for broader positive impact. The courage to live authentically and set healthy boundaries had not only improved my own life, but had also provided inspiration and practical guidance for others who were facing similar challenges. The professional recognition that followed was unexpected but meaningful. Dr. Chen nominated me for the district's Excellence in Teaching Award, citing my ability to create authentic connections with students and my commitment to modeling healthy relationship patterns in the classroom environment. The nomination letter specifically mentioned my courage in addressing personal challenges while maintaining professional effectiveness and my positive influence on both colleagues and students. The award ceremony took place on a warm evening in May, just 2 weeks before my due date. Michael accompanied me to the event, which was held in the district's administration building and attended by school board members, administrators, teachers, and community leaders. The recognition felt surreal given that just 4 months earlier, I had believed that Victoria's attack might destroy my professional reputation. During my acceptance speech, I spoke about the importance of authenticity in education and the ways that personal growth could enhance professional effectiveness. I shared my belief that students needed to see adults who were willing to be vulnerable about their own challenges and growth processes, as this modeling provided permission for young people to acknowledge their own struggles and seek appropriate support. The response to my speech was overwhelmingly positive, with several attendees approaching me afterward to share their own experiences with family challenges and personal transformation. The evening reinforced my understanding that authenticity and vulnerability, rather than being professional liabilities, were actually sources of strength that enhanced my ability to connect with others and create positive impact. As Michael and I drove home from the awards ceremony, I reflected on the remarkable journey that had begun with Victoria's attack at my baby shower 4 months earlier. The woman who had been silenced by family secrets and diminished by dysfunctional relationships had been transformed into someone who understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that truth and authenticity were more important than comfort and approval. The baby I was carrying would be born into a family that had learned to value honesty over appearance, growth over stagnation, and authentic love over conditional approval. The generational patterns of dysfunction that had characterized my family of origin were being broken through conscious choice, therapeutic work, and the commitment to creating healthier relationship dynamics. The transformation was not complete, and the work of maintaining healthy boundaries and authentic relationships would continue throughout my life. However, the foundation had been established for a different way of being in relationship with others, one that prioritized mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine care over manipulation, control, and false appearances. The courage to build something new from the ashes of family dysfunction had created possibilities that I could never have imagined, while trapped in patterns of silence and accommodation. The journey ahead would bring its own challenges, but I now possessed the tools, support, and inner strength necessary to navigate whatever difficulties arose while maintaining my commitment to authenticity and truth. The morning I went into labor, exactly 3 weeks after receiving the Excellence in Teaching Award, began with an unexpected phone call from Victoria. It was 4:47 a.m. when my phone rang, jolting both Michael and me from sleep during what had been a restless night of early contractions and anticipation. Michael reached for the phone first, his protective instincts heightened by months of managing family stress while preparing for our child's arrival. Victoria's voice was shaky and urgent as she explained that she was calling from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, where David had been admitted to the psychiatric ward following a severe panic attack that had escalated into what appeared to be a complete psychological breakdown. The collapse of his false identity had finally overwhelmed his ability to function, and the hospital staff had determined that he required immediate intensive treatment for what they diagnosed as complex post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative identity complications. The timing of this crisis felt both surreal and somehow inevitable. As I prepared to bring new life into the world, the man who had been living as a ghost of his deceased brother for 20 years was finally confronting the psychological imprisonment that had defined his existence. Victoria's call represented the culmination of months of therapeutic work that had systematically dismantled the elaborate deceptions that had sustained their marriage, while revealing the profound psychological damage that had resulted from their sustained denial of reality. Victoria's voice carried a desperation and vulnerability that I had never heard before, as she explained that David's psychiatrist had recommended that she contact family members who might be able to provide emotional support during his treatment process. The irony was profound. The woman who had attempted to destroy my reputation 4 months earlier was now reaching out to me for help during her own moment of crisis. My first instinct was to respond with the same level of compassion and support that I would offer to any family member facing a medical emergency, despite the complicated history between Victoria and me. However, the onset of more intense contractions reminded me that I was beginning my own significant medical experience and needed to prioritize my immediate health and the safe delivery of my child. Michael took the phone and spoke with Victoria directly, explaining our situation and offering to contact other family members who could provide immediate support while we focused on the birth process. His calm and practical response demonstrated the emotional stability and clear thinking that had made him such an effective partner throughout the challenges of recent months. The conversation concluded with Victoria expressing gratitude for our willingness to help coordinate family support for David's treatment, followed by her unexpected words of encouragement about our impending parenthood. Despite everything that had transpired between us, she managed to offer genuine wishes for a safe delivery and healthy baby, suggesting that her own crisis had provided perspective about what truly mattered in family relationships. The drive to Riverside Community Hospital took place during the early morning hours, when the streets were quiet and the sky was beginning to show the first hints of dawn. Michael maintained steady conversation during the journey, helping me focus on breathing techniques while managing the practical details of hospital admission and communication with our medical team. Dr. Patricia Ningen, the obstetrician who had guided us through the pregnancy, greeted us in the labor and delivery unit with the calm professionalism that had characterized her care throughout the previous 9 months. She had been informed about the family stress we had experienced during the pregnancy, and she approached our delivery with sensitivity to both the medical and emotional aspects of our experience. The early stages of labor provided time for reflection on the remarkable transformation that had occurred since the baby shower confrontation. The woman who had entered pregnancy feeling diminished by family dysfunction and silenced by inherited secrets, was preparing to become a mother with a clear sense of her own values, healthy boundaries with toxic family members, and professional support systems that would help her navigate the challenges of parenthood. Daniel Harrison arrived at the hospital during the afternoon, having driven from San Diego to provide emotional support during the delivery of the child he had helped us create through his generous donation. His presence represented the healthy family dynamics that Michael and I were committed to modeling for our child, where relationships were based on genuine care and mutual respect rather than manipulation and obligation. The conversation with Daniel during the quiet moments between contractions provided perspective on the genetic legacy our child would inherit and the family environment we were creating for his upbringing. Daniel expressed pride in his contribution to our family building process and commitment to maintaining appropriate boundaries as our child's uncle while honoring the special nature of his genetic connection. Michael's parents, Robert and Linda Harrison, arrived from Phoenix during the early evening hours, having traveled to be present for the birth of their first grandchild. Their excitement and unconditional support provided a stark contrast to the complicated dynamics that had characterized my own family's response to the pregnancy, reinforcing my understanding of what healthy family relationships could look like when based on genuine love rather than conditional approval. The most meaningful moment of the labor process occurred when my grandmother Esperanza arrived, having been driven from her home by my cousin Maria after receiving word that I was in active labor. At 83 years old, Esperanza moved slowly, but with the determination of someone who understood the significance of being present for important family milestones. Her presence in the delivery room carried particular meaning, given her role in validating my decision to break the conspiracy of silence that had characterized our family dynamics for decades. As she held my hand during the most intense contractions, she spoke quietly in Spanish about the importance of bringing children into the world with truth and love, rather than secrets and shame. The birth of Gabriel Daniel Rodriguez Harrison at 11:42 p.m. represented the culmination of a journey that had begun with heartbreak over our fertility challenges, and had evolved through betrayal, therapeutic healing, and ultimately transformation into a family unit that prioritized authenticity and emotional health above social appearances and traditional expectations. Holding my son for the first time while surrounded by people who had supported us through the most difficult period of our lives, I experienced a profound sense of completion and new beginning simultaneously. The child who had been conceived through careful planning and generous donation had been born into a family that had learned to value truth over comfort, growth over stagnation, and genuine connection over superficial harmony. Gabriel's first hours of life were marked by the quiet joy and wonder that accompanies the arrival of a deeply wanted child. Michael's response to becoming a father was both tender and powerful, as he held his son with the confidence of someone who had prepared thoroughly for this responsibility, while understanding that genetic connection was less important than committed love and consistent presence. Daniel's first interaction with Gabriel was handled with the grace and appropriate boundaries that had characterized his participation throughout our family-building process. He expressed gratitude for the opportunity to help create our child while making clear his commitment to maintaining his role as uncle, rather than claiming any parental authority or ongoing involvement beyond normal extended family relationships. The hospital stay provided time for quiet bonding and reflection on the transformation that had occurred over the previous 5 months. The woman who had been publicly humiliated at her baby shower had given birth as someone who understood her own worth and had the support systems necessary to protect her child from the dysfunction that had characterized her own upbringing. The stream of visitors during our hospital stay provided evidence of the community that had formed around our family during the period of crisis and healing. Colleagues from school, friends from our neighborhood, members of Michael's family, and even some of my relatives who had initially been critical of my decision to reveal Victoria's secret, came to meet Gabriel and offer their support for our new family. Dr. Sarah Kim, our family therapist, visited on the second day to check on our transition to parenthood and provide guidance about maintaining healthy boundaries as we introduced Gabriel to the various family members who would be part of his life. Her practical advice about protecting our new family unit from external pressures and maintaining the progress we had made in therapy was invaluable as we prepared to leave the hospital environment. The most unexpected visitor was Victoria herself, who appeared in our hospital room on the afternoon before our discharge. Her appearance was dramatically changed from the polished perfection that had characterized her presentation throughout our lives. The psychological crisis she was experiencing had stripped away the artificial enhancements that had supported her false identity, revealing someone who looked exhausted but somehow more authentic than I had ever seen her. Victoria's interaction with Gabriel was brief but meaningful. She held her nephew with genuine tenderness, while expressing regret about the way her actions had affected our pregnancy experience and gratitude that we had been willing to maintain family connections despite the pain she had caused. Her words carried the weight of someone who was finally confronting the reality of her choices and their consequences. The conversation that followed was the most honest exchange Victoria and I had shared since the revelation of her secret 20 years earlier. She acknowledged that her attack on me at the baby shower had been motivated by her own psychological desperation rather than any genuine concern about my choices or character. She expressed understanding that rebuilding our relationship would require sustained effort and professional support rather than simple apologies. Most significantly, Victoria shared that David's psychiatric hospitalization had forced her to confront the reality that their marriage had been built on psychological dysfunction rather than genuine love and compatibility. The therapeutic work required for his recovery would necessitate fundamental changes in their relationship dynamics that might ultimately prove incompatible with maintaining their marriage. Her honesty about the uncertain future of her marriage and her commitment to individual therapy represented the beginning of authentic self-examination that had been prevented by decades of denial and deception. While the outcome of her therapeutic process remained uncertain, her willingness to acknowledge reality rather than maintaining elaborate fictions suggested that genuine healing might be possible. The discharge from the hospital marked the beginning of our life as a family of 3, with Gabriel entering a home environment that had been carefully prepared to support his emotional and physical development. The nursery that Michael and I had created was designed to be a peaceful sanctuary where our son could feel safe and loved while developing his own unique personality without pressure to conform to predetermined expectations or family roles. The first weeks of parenthood were characterized by the typical challenges of sleep deprivation and adjustment to caring for a newborn, but they were also marked by the profound joy of watching Gabriel develop his own distinct characteristics and preferences. His presence in our home created a sense of purpose and completion that validated every difficult decision we had made during the previous months. The support system that surrounded our new family provided practical assistance and emotional encouragement that made the transition to parenthood manageable, despite the ongoing family complications. Friends and colleagues organized meal deliveries. Michael's parents extended their visit to provide hands-on help with household responsibilities, and Daniel made regular visits to support his role as devoted uncle. The most meaningful aspect of Gabriel's first month was witnessing the way his presence began to heal relationships that had been damaged by months of family crisis. His innocence and vulnerability reminded everyone involved that family connections could be rebuilt around love and shared commitment to his well-being rather than historical grievances and dysfunctional patterns. The transformation that had begun with Victoria's attack at my baby shower had culminated in the birth of a child who would grow up in an environment where authenticity was valued over appearances, where professional support was sought when needed, and where love was expressed through consistent presence and honest communication rather than manipulation and control. Gabriel Daniel Rodriguez Harrison had been born not only to parents who wanted him desperately, but into a family system that had been consciously restructured to support healthy development and authentic relationships. The generational patterns of dysfunction that had characterized both sides of our family were being interrupted through deliberate choice and sustained effort to create something better for the next generation. 3 months after Gabriel's birth, I found myself preparing for the most significant professional presentation of my career. The California Association of Secondary School Educators had invited me to deliver a keynote address at their annual conference, specifically requesting that I speak about creating authentic connections with students while navigating personal challenges. The invitation represented recognition that my journey through family crisis had enhanced rather than compromised my effectiveness as an educator. The presentation preparation required me to articulate the specific strategies and insights that had emerged from my transformation over the previous 8 months. The process of organizing my thoughts for public presentation helped me recognize how profoundly my understanding of relationships, authenticity, and professional effectiveness had evolved since Victoria's attack at the baby shower. The conference venue was the Anaheim Convention Center, where over 800 educators from across California would gather to share best practices and professional development insights. The scale of the audience represented an opportunity to influence educational approaches at institutions throughout the state, potentially affecting thousands of students who would benefit from teachers who understood the connection between personal authenticity and professional effectiveness. Michael accompanied me to the conference, bringing 3-month-old Gabriel so that I could maintain breastfeeding while fulfilling this professional commitment. Their presence provided emotional support while demonstrating the healthy family dynamics that had emerged from our commitment to authenticity and mutual respect. Gabriel's calm demeanor and easy adaptability reflected the secure attachment that had developed through consistent, responsive parenting. The title of my presentation was Teaching from Truth: How Personal Authenticity Enhances Educational Impact. The central thesis focused on the ways that educators who model vulnerability, growth, and healthy boundary setting create classroom environments where students feel safe to take intellectual risks, acknowledge their own struggles, and develop authentic relationships with learning and personal development. The presentation began with a carefully crafted overview of my experience with family dysfunction and the ways that maintaining secrets and avoiding conflict had limited my ability to connect genuinely with students who were facing their own challenges with family expectations and personal identity development. I explained how the crisis precipitated by Victoria's attack had forced me to confront patterns of accommodation and people-pleasing that had prevented me from modeling the kind of authentic strength that students needed to see from trusted adults. The audience response during the opening section was attentive and engaged, with many educators nodding in recognition of their own experiences with balancing personal challenges and professional responsibilities. The universality of these struggles created immediate connection and credibility for the more specific strategies I would present later in the session. The core content of the presentation focused on specific techniques for creating authentic connections with students while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. I described methods for sharing personal growth experiences in ways that provided inspiration and guidance without overwhelming students with inappropriate personal details. The key principle involved focusing on universal themes and lessons rather than specific family drama or private circumstances. One particular strategy that resonated strongly with the audience involved what I termed transparent resilience modeling. This approach required educators to acknowledge when they were facing challenges while demonstrating healthy coping strategies and problem-solving approaches. Students benefited from seeing adults who could admit difficulties without becoming overwhelmed or losing their capacity to provide stable support and guidance. The presentation included specific examples from my classroom experience during the months following the baby shower incident. I described how my increased authenticity had enabled deeper conversations with students about topics such as family expectations, identity development, and the courage required to make choices that aligned with personal values rather than external pressures. Isabella Martinez, the student who had been struggling with family pressure to abandon her college plans, had agreed to participate in the presentation via video conference to share her perspective on how teacher authenticity had affected her own decision-making process. Her articulate description of finding courage to pursue her educational goals while respecting her cultural heritage provided powerful evidence of the positive impact that authentic adult relationships could have on adolescent development. The questions and discussion that followed the formal presentation revealed the hunger that many educators felt for permission to be more authentic in their professional relationships while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Several participants shared their own experiences with family challenges and the ways that maintaining false appearances had limited their effectiveness in connecting with students who needed genuine adult support. Dr. Linda Chen, a high school counselor from San Francisco, shared her experience with helping students navigate family dysfunction while struggling with her own parents' mental health challenges. She described how my presentation had provided language and strategies for being appropriately vulnerable about personal growth while maintaining the professional stability that students required from trusted adults. The most meaningful feedback came from Marcus Thompson, a middle school teacher from Sacramento whose family had been affected by his brother's suicide several years earlier. He explained that my emphasis on the connection between personal healing and professional effectiveness had encouraged him to seek therapy for his own grief and trauma, which had subsequently improved his ability to recognize and support students who were dealing with their own mental health challenges. The conference presentation represented a significant milestone in my understanding of how personal transformation could create opportunities for broader professional impact. The experience of speaking to hundreds of educators about authenticity and resilience confirmed that my journey through family crisis had developed expertise and insights that could benefit others facing similar challenges. The weeks following the conference brought numerous opportunities to expand this work through additional speaking engagements, professional development workshops, and consultation with school districts that wanted to improve their approaches to supporting both students and staff who were dealing with personal challenges while maintaining educational excellence. The most significant of these opportunities came from Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the superintendent of the Riverside Unified School District, who invited me to develop a comprehensive training program for teachers and administrators about creating supportive school environments that acknowledge the reality of personal challenges while maintaining professional effectiveness. The program development process required extensive research into best practices for educator wellness, student support systems, and organizational approaches to balancing personal authenticity with professional responsibilities. The work drew heavily on my own experience while incorporating evidence-based strategies from psychology, education, and organizational development literature. The resulting program, titled Authentic Leadership in Educational Settings, became a model that was subsequently adopted by school districts throughout Southern California. The curriculum addressed topics such as appropriate self-disclosure, boundary setting, crisis intervention, and creating classroom cultures that supported both academic achievement and social-emotional development. The professional recognition that accompanied this work exceeded anything I had imagined when I was struggling with family dysfunction 8 months earlier. The woman who had felt diminished and controlled by family secrets had become someone whose expertise was sought by educational leaders, who recognized the connection between personal authenticity and professional excellence. However, the most meaningful aspect of this professional growth was its impact on my daily interactions with students at Roosevelt High School. The increased comfort with vulnerability and authenticity that had emerged from my transformation had created opportunities for deeper connections with teenagers who were facing their own challenges with family expectations, identity development, and the courage required to pursue authentic self-expression. One particularly significant relationship had developed with David Kim, a 17-year-old student whose family had immigrated from South Korea when he was 12 years old. David was struggling with intense pressure from his parents to pursue pre-medical studies, while his genuine interests and talents lay in creative writing and journalism. The conflict between family expectations and personal aspirations had created anxiety and depression that were affecting his academic performance and social relationships. My willingness to share appropriate details about my own experience with family dysfunction and the process of establishing healthy boundaries had provided David with a framework for understanding his situation and considering alternatives that honored both his heritage and his individual goals. The conversations we had during lunch periods and after-school sessions had helped him develop strategies for communicating with his parents about his interests, while demonstrating respect for their sacrifices and cultural values. David's progress over several months illustrated the impact that authentic adult relationships could have on adolescent development. His increasing confidence in expressing his own perspectives while maintaining family relationships had translated into improved academic performance, increased social engagement, and a clearer sense of his own identity and goals. The relationship with David and similar connections with other students reinforced my understanding that the personal growth work I had undertaken following Victoria's attack had not only healed my own psychological wounds, but had also enhanced my capacity to provide meaningful support to young people who were facing their own developmental challenges. The most profound realization during this period was that my experience with family betrayal and subsequent healing had developed empathy and insight that could not have been acquired through professional training alone. The authenticity that had emerged from confronting painful truths about family dynamics had created trust and credibility with students that enhanced every aspect of my educational practice. This understanding led to the development of a peer mentoring program at Roosevelt High School, where students who had successfully navigated family challenges provided support and guidance to classmates who were facing similar difficulties. The program created a supportive community that reduced isolation and provided practical strategies for managing family expectations while pursuing personal goals. The success of the peer mentoring program attracted attention from other schools and youth organizations throughout the region. The model we had developed demonstrated that personal authenticity and vulnerability, when appropriately shared and professionally supported, could create powerful healing and growth opportunities for both individuals and communities. The professional growth that had emerged from my personal transformation represented a complete reversal of Victoria's intended outcome when she attacked me at the baby shower. Her attempt to destroy my reputation through public humiliation had instead catalyzed changes that enhanced my professional effectiveness and created opportunities for broader positive impact. The irony was not lost on me that Victoria's cruelest moment had become the catalyst for my greatest professional achievements. The woman who had tried to shame me for my fertility challenges and family choices had inadvertently provided the crisis that forced me to develop the courage, authenticity, and resilience that had become the foundation of my enhanced effectiveness as an educator and mentor. As I reflected on this transformation while feeding Gabriel during quiet morning hours, I understood that the greatest gift I could give my son was the example of someone who had learned to transform adversity into strength, betrayal into wisdom, and personal healing into service to others. The child who had been conceived through love and generosity would grow up understanding that challenges could become opportunities for growth when approached with courage and supported by healthy relationships. The professional recognition and expanded opportunities that had emerged from my authenticity represented more than career advancement. They demonstrated that living truthfully and courageously created value that extended far beyond personal satisfaction to meaningful contribution to the well-being of others, particularly young people who needed examples of adults who had successfully navigated difficult circumstances while maintaining their integrity and compassion. 6 months after Gabriel's birth, I received a phone call that would test everything I had learned about boundaries, authenticity, and the courage required to maintain healthy relationships in the face of family manipulation. The caller was Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the family therapist who had been working with Victoria and David since their separation following the revelation of their true identities. Her voice carried the professional concern that had characterized our previous conversations, but this time it was accompanied by an urgency that immediately captured my attention. Victoria had experienced what Dr. Walsh described as a complete psychological breakdown, following David's decision to file for divorce and seek permanent separation from the elaborate deception that had defined their marriage for 20 years. The collapse of her false identity had triggered a cascade of mental health crises that had required intensive psychiatric intervention and ongoing therapeutic support to prevent further deterioration. The breakdown had manifested initially as severe anxiety and depression, but had evolved into what appeared to be a dissociative disorder that left Victoria unable to distinguish between the fictional narrative she had maintained about her marriage and the reality of her actual life experiences. She had begun experiencing episodes where she believed that David was actually James, her deceased first husband, and that their children were products of her original marriage rather than her relationship with David. Dr. Walsh explained that Victoria's treatment team had determined that her recovery would require systematic confrontation with the truth about her life history, including acknowledgement of James's death, acceptance of her actual relationship with David, and integration of the reality that her elaborate deception had caused significant psychological harm to everyone involved, particularly her children. The most concerning aspect of Victoria's condition was her increasing fixation on reclaiming what she perceived as her rightful position within our family structure. She had become convinced that my decision to reveal her secret had been motivated by jealousy of her supposed perfect life, and she had developed elaborate theories about how she could restore her reputation and family relationships through strategic manipulation of family dynamics. Dr. Walsh's call was prompted by Victoria's repeated requests to have me included in her therapeutic process, ostensibly for the purpose of reconciliation and family healing. However, the treatment team had concerns that Victoria's motivation was actually to manipulate me into retracting my revelations about her deception, or providing public validation of a revised narrative that would minimize her accountability for the harm she had caused. The professional recommendation was that I consider participating in a carefully structured therapeutic intervention that would provide Victoria with the opportunity to make genuine amends for her behavior while protecting me from further manipulation or emotional abuse. Dr. Walsh emphasized that my participation would be entirely voluntary and that the therapeutic framework would include safeguards to prevent Victoria from using the sessions to continue patterns of manipulation or blame shifting. My initial response to this request was skepticism about Victoria's motivation and concern about exposing myself to additional emotional manipulation during a period when I was focused on caring for Gabriel and building the healthy family environment that Michael and I had worked so hard to create. The previous 8 months had provided clear evidence that maintaining distance from Victoria's psychological drama was essential for my own mental health and family stability. However, Dr. Walsh's explanation of Victoria's deteriorating condition raised questions about my ethical obligations as a family member and the potential long-term consequences of her untreated mental illness for her children, who were already struggling with the psychological impact of their parents' divorce and their father's identity crisis. Marcus and Sophia, Victoria's children, had been living primarily with David's parents, while both of their parents received intensive psychological treatment. The arrangement had provided stability and consistent care, but both children were exhibiting signs of trauma related to the collapse of their family structure and the revelation that their understanding of their parents' relationship had been based on elaborate deceptions. The consideration of participating in Victoria's therapeutic process required extensive discussion with Michael and consultation with Dr. Sarah Kim, our own family therapist, who had been helping us navigate the ongoing family complications while protecting our new family unit from external dysfunction. Both provided valuable perspective on the potential risks and benefits of engaging with Victoria's treatment team. Michael's primary concern was protecting our family from additional manipulation, while acknowledging that Victoria's children deserved consideration in any decision about therapeutic intervention. His perspective was informed by his own experience growing up in a healthy family environment, where accountability and genuine reconciliation were distinguished from manipulation and false reconciliation designed to avoid consequences. Dr. Kim's professional assessment was that my participation in Victoria's therapeutic process could potentially benefit both Victoria's recovery and my own continued healing, provided that the intervention was structured to prevent manipulation and that I maintained clear boundaries about acceptable behavior and communication patterns. The decision to participate in the therapeutic intervention represented another test of the authenticity and courage that had emerged from my transformation over the previous months. The woman who had been silenced by family secrets for decades was being asked to engage directly with the person who had caused the most significant betrayal of my adult life, with the goal of creating genuine healing rather than superficial reconciliation. The therapeutic session took place in Dr. Walsh's office on a Thursday afternoon in December, nearly 9 months after the baby shower confrontation that had initiated this entire journey of family crisis and personal transformation. The setting was carefully arranged to provide both structure and emotional safety, with Dr. Walsh facilitating the conversation and another therapist present to provide additional professional oversight. Victoria's appearance was dramatically different from the polished perfection that had characterized her presentation throughout our lives. The psychological breakdown had stripped away the artificial enhancements and careful grooming that had supported her false identity, revealing someone who looked genuinely vulnerable and emotionally exhausted for the first time in my memory. The session began with Dr. Walsh establishing ground rules for communication that would prevent the kind of defensive reactions and personal attacks that had characterized our family's historical approach to conflict. The therapeutic framework required both Victoria and me to focus on our own experiences and emotions rather than attempting to analyze or criticize each other's behavior or motivations. Victoria's initial contribution to the session was a more complete acknowledgement of her behavior at the baby shower and its impact on our family relationships than she had previously provided. She described her attack on me as the desperate action of someone whose psychological defenses were failing, and she took responsibility for the calculated nature of her cruelty without attempting to minimize its impact or seek immediate forgiveness. Her account of the psychological deterioration that had led to the baby shower incident revealed that she had been experiencing increasing anxiety about maintaining her deception for several years prior to my pregnancy announcement. The elaborate fiction that had initially provided protection from grief and trauma had gradually become a psychological prison that required constant vigilance and energy to maintain. The most significant revelation in Victoria's therapeutic disclosure was her acknowledgement that her attack on me had been motivated not only by fear of exposure but also by genuine envy of the authentic relationship that Michael and I had built. She had recognized that our marriage was based on honesty and mutual support, rather than deception and mutual enabling, and her inability to create similar authenticity in her own relationships had triggered resentment that she had channeled into cruelty. Victoria's explanation of her psychological state during the baby shower provided insight into the desperation that had driven her to such extreme behavior. She had been convinced that maintaining her deception was essential for her psychological survival, and she had been willing to sacrifice my well-being to protect the fictional narrative that had become her primary defense against trauma and grief. The therapeutic process required me to articulate the impact that Victoria's attack had on my own psychological well-being and family relationships, while also acknowledging the ways that maintaining her secret for 20 years had affected my own authenticity and self-esteem. The conversation provided an opportunity to express the full scope of harm that had resulted from both her original deception and her subsequent attack on my character. However, the most transformative aspect of the therapeutic session was my recognition that Victoria's psychological breakdown and my own transformation had followed parallel but opposite trajectories. While her elaborate defenses had collapsed under the weight of their own contradictions, my willingness to confront difficult truths had created strength and authenticity that enhanced every aspect of my life. The session concluded with Victoria's request for forgiveness and her expression of hope that we might eventually rebuild our relationship based on honesty rather than deception. Her words carried genuine remorse and acknowledgement of responsibility, but they also revealed continued difficulty with accepting that forgiveness was not something that could be requested or negotiated, but rather something that might emerge naturally from sustained behavioral change and genuine accountability. My response to Victoria's request was informed by the therapeutic work I had done over the previous months and my understanding that forgiveness was a process rather than a decision that could be made in a single moment. I acknowledged her apology while making clear that rebuilding our relationship would require sustained evidence of genuine change, rather than expressions of remorse or promises of future improvement. The most important outcome of the therapeutic session was the establishment of a framework for future communication that would protect both of us from further manipulation while allowing for the possibility of authentic relationship development if Victoria's recovery process produced sustained behavioral change and genuine accountability. The therapeutic intervention also provided closure on questions that had been troubling me about my own role in enabling Victoria's deception and the impact that my 20-year silence had on family dynamics. Dr. Walsh's professional perspective helped me understand that my decision to keep Victoria's secret had been understandable given my age and family circumstances at the time, but that my subsequent transformation into someone who prioritized truth over comfort represented healthy growth rather than betrayal of family loyalty. The weeks following the therapeutic session brought evidence that Victoria's recovery process was producing genuine insights and behavioral changes, rather than simply new strategies for manipulation and control. Her communication with other family members became more honest and less focused on managing their perceptions of her situation, and her interactions with her children began to acknowledge the reality of their family circumstances rather than attempting to maintain fictional narratives. The most significant indicator of Victoria's genuine progress was her decision to seek employment outside the home for the first time since her marriage to David, recognizing that her psychological health would benefit from establishing identity and self-worth that were independent of her relationships and family roles. The decision represented a fundamental shift from dependence on others for validation to commitment to developing authentic self-knowledge and personal strength. However, the process of rebuilding trust and authentic relationship would require sustained effort over time rather than dramatic gestures or therapeutic breakthroughs. The patterns of deception and manipulation that had characterized Victoria's approach to relationships for decades would need to be replaced gradually with consistent demonstration of honesty, accountability, and genuine concern for others' well-being. The therapeutic intervention had provided a foundation for potential reconciliation while establishing boundaries that would protect my own family from further manipulation or emotional abuse. The woman who had been silenced by family secrets had become someone who could engage with dysfunction from a position of strength, while maintaining commitment to authenticity and healthy relationship patterns. 9 months after Gabriel's birth, the annual Rodriguez family Christmas gathering presented the first opportunity to test whether the therapeutic work and individual healing that had occupied the previous year could translate into functional family dynamics during traditional celebrations. The event would take place at my parents' home, the same location where Victoria had attacked me at the baby shower, creating symbolic significance that none of us could ignore. The preparation for this gathering required extensive coordination between multiple family members who had been affected by the revelations and subsequent therapeutic interventions that had dominated our relationships throughout the year. My parents had spent months processing the discovery that their supposedly perfect daughter had been living an elaborate deception while their other daughter had been silenced by the burden of keeping destructive secrets. Carmen's approach to the upcoming gathering reflected her ongoing struggle with accepting the reality of family dysfunction, rather than maintaining the appearance of harmony that had characterized her approach to relationships throughout her adult life. Her planning conversations focused heavily on ensuring that nothing would disrupt the Christmas celebration, revealing her continued preference for avoiding difficult topics rather than addressing underlying relationship problems. Roberto's preparation was more thoughtful and demonstrated greater acceptance of the changes that had occurred within our family structure. His conversations with me about the gathering acknowledged that rebuilding trust and authentic relationships would require time and sustained effort rather than single events or forced interactions designed to restore previous dynamics. The most complex preparation involved Victoria herself, who had made significant progress in her therapeutic work but remained fragile in her psychological recovery from the collapse of her false identity and the end of her marriage to David. Her participation in the Christmas gathering would represent her first extended interaction with family members since the therapeutic intervention that had established boundaries for future communication. Victoria's children, Marcus and Sophia, would be attending the gathering while continuing to live primarily with David's parents during their parents' ongoing divorce proceedings and individual therapy processes. Both children had been receiving their own therapeutic support to address the trauma of discovering that their understanding of their family history had been based on elaborate deceptions maintained by their parents. The decision to include Gabriel in this gathering required careful consideration of the potential emotional intensity and my responsibility to protect my infant son from exposure to family dysfunction that could affect the secure attachment relationships that Michael and I had worked to establish during his first months of life. Michael's perspective on the gathering was informed by his experience growing up in a family where conflicts were addressed directly and relationships were based on genuine affection rather than obligation or appearance management. His support for my participation was coupled with clear agreements about leaving immediately if the gathering became emotionally unsafe or manipulative. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.